Hello, wonderful students. Welcome to EGC817 once again. This morning, or let me say this lesson, we are going to be looking specifically at the classification of mental disorder. And in doing this, we are going to be taking a brief history about this classification of mental disorder. As you all know, we have various categories of this mental disorder that we talked about. So, intensely, we are going to be looking at the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorder, shortened to be DSM-4 for now. Then, we are going to be looking at the international classification of diseases. On the whole, we are going to compare these two systems of classification of mental disorder. After all this, we are going to look at the major categories that we have of mental disorder. So if you are ready, let's roll. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the class. I remain your facilitator for this course, PED 342, that is, for EGC 817, that is abnormal psychology. What are the objectives, the intended learning outcomes that we ought to bring out at the end of this lesson? We should be able to give a brief history of classification of mental disorders. We should be able to explain the evolution of DSM. We should be able to compare DSM with ICD-10, and we should be able to explain major categories of mental disorders. We are going to be looking at a brief history of classification of mental disorder. All systems of classification system stem from the work of Kraepelin, who published the first recognized textbook on psychiatry in 1883, that is Genetic Vulnerabilities. Kraepelin, 1896, proposed two major groups of serious mental diseases: dementia praecox, the original term for schizophrenia caused by a chemical imbalance, and manic depressive psychosis caused by faulty metabolism, brain dysfunction, and neural plasticity. Now, his classification helped to establish the organic nature of mental disorders and formed the basis for the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorder, that is DSM. That is the APA's official classification system, and the International Classification System, which is the International Classification of Diseases, ICD, Mental and Behavioral Disorder, published by the World Health Organization. The evolution of the DSM. The DSM is currently in its 4th edition with some recent modification referred to as DSM-4 TR. TR in front there is text revision. The first edition of the manual, that is DSM-1, appeared in 1952 and was largely an outgrowth of attempts to standardize diagnostic practices in use among military personnel in World War II. Mental disorders were included in ICD for the first time in 1948, and ICD-10 was published in 1992. For DSM, the first edition was 1952, DSM-2 came in 1968, DSM-3 in 1980, then there was DSM-3 revised in 1987, before we have DSM-4 from 1994, revised in the year 2000. The major categories of mental disorders as identified by DSM-4 TR and ICD-10. If we look at the two columns we are having here under DSM and under ICD, we have classification of mental diseases. DSM is having major classifications as compared to ICD, where it's breaking it down into the basics. When we get to number 7, number 8, from number 6, 7, 8, we discover that it is only DSM that classifies such diseases: dissociative disorder, adjustment disorder. But when you get to 10, 11, 12, it is only ICD that is having entries, whereas for some others, the two of them are well balanced. What are the major categories of mental disorder based on DSM-4, TR, and ICD-10? The essence of this category is that from cradle to grave, we have all these disorders affecting a human from at one time or the other in his or her life. We have organic mental disorders, schizophrenia and related psychotic disorders, psychoactive substance use disorders, mood affective disorders, neurotic disorders, disorders of infancy, childhood and adolescence, mental retardation, personality disorders, eating and sleeping disorders, sexual and gender identity disorders. Now, what we are going to be looking at is the summary of what we have been talking about since we started. That Kraepelin in 1898 proposed the two major groups of serious mental diseases, schizophrenia and manic depressive psychosis. That the first edition of DSM came out in 1968 and is currently in its fourth edition. That DSM uses a larger number of discrete categories to classify disorders, while ICD-10 uses smaller number of more general categories. That the major categories of mental disorders were found to include schizophrenia, mood affective disorders, mental retardation, eating and sleeping disorders, all which affect humans from cradle to grave. Thanks for your time for this wonderful lesson. Wishing us all a wonderful experience as we study abnormal psychology. Bye for now. I remain Dr. Olasupo Bamidele from the National Open University of Nigeria.